Music, Bruce Willis. A name that doesn't just sit in Hollywood history, it echoes through it. The kind of icon who didn't need perfection to be unforgettable. He turned bruises into momentum, turned exhaustion into legend, turned the quiet inside a man into something the whole world could feel. He wasn't born wrapped in comfort or certainty. He didn't inherit a spotlight. He fought his way toward it with scraped knuckles, sleepless years, and a stubborn refusal to stay down. From the cracked corners of an ordinary life, he became extraordinary anyway. Not because the world handed him a crown, but because he kept walking forward, even when the road kept breaking apart under his feet. The bartender who became a headline. The working class kid who changed the shape of the American hero. He made courage look human. He made toughness look tired, bleeding, funny, and still standing. He gave us Die Hard, where bravery didn't arrive polished. It arrived limping, crawling, and swearing through pain. He gave us The Sixth Sense, where even the quietest roles could carry oceans underneath them. And behind the smoke, behind the applause, behind the posters and premiere lights, there was always something tighter, something heavier. A man holding his life together while millions watched him play unbreakable. The world loved the rise. Few people paused to imagine the cost of staying upright. His fortune became enormous. Not just money, but proof of decades spent pushing through pressure, through physical strain, through relentless demand. In places like Beverly Hills, glass and sunlight stretch across rooms built for privacy. Pools shining like emeralds under heat that never seems to end. And far away in Idaho, the quieter opposite, a refuge shaped by water and distance, a place that feels like breathing again. Luxury followed him like a shadow. Cars that gleamed with status. A life designed for motion, between sets, between airports, between nights that didn't slow down just because a body needed rest. The world called it success. But success rarely comes with stillness. It comes with speed. It comes with calendars that tighten like fists. It comes with a life admired loudly while the living of it happens far away from peace. And if Bruce Willis ever made you believe in strength, the kind that doesn't pretend it isn't hurting, stay with this story. Because what he survived off screen mattered just as much as what he conquered in front of the camera. Comment, 70 or right rip Bruce Willis to honor them. Music, before anyone ever cheered his name, Bruce Willis learned survival in the smallest, hardest ways, inside a home where calm was never guaranteed, where love existed but felt stretched thin, where the walls seemed to carry arguments the way ceilings carry smoke. He entered the world on March 19th, 1955, in Idar Oberstein, West Germany, in the hush of a country still rebuilding its breath. The streets weren't loud with celebration. They were quiet with aftermath. He was born into a life that didn't offer softness easily. His father, David, carried a silence that didn't come from peace. It came from battles that never fully ended, even when the war was over. There are some people who return home but never truly come back. Their eyes stay distant. Their patience stays thin. Their anger becomes part of the furniture. His mother, Marlene, tried to hold warmth together with whatever she could find, tried to patch a family with tired hands and limited options, tried to make something steady inside a world that kept shifting. They lived close to the edge, close to the kind of breaking point you can feel in a room even when no one speaks. Cold winters slid through cracks in the walls like they belonged there. Hunger didn't arrive as drama. It arrived as routine. And long after childhood, there were sounds Bruce would never unhear, like the quiet of a kitchen where there wasn't enough, like the scrape of a spoon in a pot with nothing left to give. When he was just 2 years old, they crossed the Atlantic, chasing America like a promise. But promises don't always turn into rescue. New Jersey didn't deliver a miracle. It delivered a different struggle, dressed in different weather. A cramped home, tired wallpaper, air that hummed with factories nearby, always working, never resting. Money came and went like a rumor dot, and his father's drinking blurred time. Days melted into each other until it was hard to tell whether the next night would be loud or quiet, and worse, whether silence would be relief or warning. Eventually, the marriage split under the weight of what it couldn't carry anymore. When David left, Bruce didn't collapse into tears. He stood there, frozen, watching red tail lights fade into darkness, watching a goodbye disappear without tenderness. The quiet afterward didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. It felt like a room that suddenly has too much air and not enough warmth. As the oldest of four, he stepped forward without being asked. He tried to turn chaos into jokes, tried to pull laughter into rooms where fear had moved in. He became a shield in small ways, hands over a younger brother's ears. A whisper of, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. And in doing that, he learned something most people never learn until life forces it on them: how to hold still while everything shakes. But even with that strength, there was one battle he couldn't muscle through with willpower: the war inside his own mouth. His stutter was severe. Speaking wasn't casual. It was dangerous. Every word felt like stepping onto glass and hoping you didn't bleed too much. In classrooms, when he tried to speak, the pauses became traps. The laughter that followed wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was worse, lingering and quiet and permanent. It settled into him. He became smaller on the inside. He learned silence as protection. The other kids gave him names that stuck like splinters. And the more he was mocked, the more he withdrew, building walls no one could see. Defiance came next. Skipped classes, sharp answers, small rebellions. A young man pushing back against a world that felt too ready to label him a failure before he even had a chance to start. Then, at 17, something cracked open in a way that changed everything. He stepped onto a stage in a high school auditorium, shaking hands in tight breath beneath harsh lights. And in that moment, something almost impossible happened. The stutter vanished. The voice that betrayed him in life suddenly belonged to him in performance. And maybe that was the first time he understood the real power of becoming someone else. Not as escape, but as survival. Applause didn't sound like mockery. It sounded like release. From then on, acting wasn't a hobby. It wasn't a dream dressed up in fantasy. It became a lifeline, a way to fight back against everything that tried to reduce him. The wounds didn't disappear, they hardened. They turned into armor. People would one day call him unstoppable, unbreakable, fearless. But the truth was simpler and more human. He learned endurance before anyone ever learned his name, comment or write. R.I.P. David to honor them. Comment or write Marlene to honor them. Music, dreams rarely grow in comfort. They grow in noise. They grow in hunger. They grow in that slow, grinding insistence of a person who refuses to be erased. In 1973. At 18, Bruce left New Jersey with almost nothing: one suitcase, a cheap meal, and the memory of a stage where he'd finally felt like himself. He enrolled at Montclair State University to study drama, but college couldn't quiet the restless urgency inside him. Life felt too immediate for waiting. He didn't want to sit still while his future stayed out of reach. So he dropped out. He took himself to Manhattan, the kind of city that doesn't greet you with kindness or cruelty. It just doesn't notice you at all. That kind of invisibility is its own kind of cold. His first winter in Hell's Kitchen was relentless. Radiators rattled like they were close to quitting. Windows shook through long nights. He slept in his coat, breathing into darkness, pressing his hands to walls just to steal a trace of warmth. When rent ran out, he folded himself onto friends' floors, Shrinking his whole existence into a bag that got lighter as life got harder, food became calculation. Tap water became dinner. One can of something could become 2 days if you convince your body to cooperate. Hunger wasn't poetic. Hunger was sharp, steady, patient. It stayed with him like a shadow, keeping him awake long after hope should have gone quiet. His shoes split. Snow soaked through. Every step felt like work. He took whatever jobs appeared, guarding empty places so silent he could hear his heartbeat, hauling weight until his hands cracked, driving strangers through highways glowing under sodium light, and most nights he bartended. Rooms thick with smoke and loneliness, laughter too loud, music too aggressive, tips barely enough to keep tomorrow alive. The smell of spilled beer followed him home like a brand. Behind that bar, something else emerged, a louder version of him, a sharper version. A man who could joke, pour drinks, throw confidence around like it belonged to him. A man who could play the room the way he once played the stage. Every shift became a kind of rehearsal, even if he didn't yet know what for. Auditions came early. Lines around blocks in the freezing morning. Headshots in hand. Hope thinning with every rejection. Sometimes casting directors didn't even look up. Sometimes the answer was no without words. He walked home with aching feet and a few coins that sounded like insult in his pocket, but rejection didn't knock him out. It trained him. It taught him how to live with disappointment without surrendering to it. Those years carved endurance into his body like muscle memory. Long before audiences watched him save people on screen, Bruce Willis mastered the hardest skill of all, getting through the night anyway. Comment 70 you're right. R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Music, it didn't start with fireworks. It started with the stillness right before a door finally opens. In 1985. After thousands of closed rooms and silent rejections, he walked into a casting space in Los Angeles, carrying the exhaustion of years, scruffy, underslept, a grin that didn't ask permission. And when he spoke, the room didn't politely listen, it snapped to attention. David Addison wasn't just a role. It was a collision, a personality that fit him like it had been waiting. And when Moonlighting hit the screen, television suddenly felt alive in a different way. He was fast, hilarious, reckless in the best sense, the kind of presence that made audiences feel like he was talking directly to them. Suddenly, the distance between broke and beloved vanished. Awards followed. Applause arrived so fast it almost felt like impact. But under the laughter lived fatigue. Under the spotlight lived pressure. When you spend your whole life waiting for the door, sometimes walking through it feels like holding your breath. Then came 1988, the test. Hollywood handed him Die Hard, a script with doubt baked into it. Studios questioned him. Critics questioned him. They couldn't see how a television comedian could carry an action film. They wanted someone polished, someone built like a statue. Bruce didn't argue. He worked. He endured. Under relentless lighting and physical strain, he gave the camera something it didn't have to fake. John McClane wasn't perfect. He was human. He crawled. He bled. He survived. And when the film exploded into success, it didn't just make money. It changed the definition of what an action hero could be. Sequels followed. Contracts grew. Suddenly he wasn't just a star, he was a force. A man who'd once counted coins, now signing numbers that felt impossible to him. But the higher you climb, the harsher gravity becomes. The 1990s came with proof that fame doesn't promise stability. Some films reminded audiences of his range. Others stumbled. Criticism sharpened. Headlines got cruel, and still, he kept working. Because in that world, you're only as strong as the last thing you did. So he made the next one count. In 1994, Quentin Tarantino offered Pulp Fiction, and Bruce accepted less money for more meaning. A battered fighter, a man refusing to fold. The choice didn't just steady his career, it reminded people who he was. Years later, the sixth sense arrived, and Bruce did something quieter but deeper. Restraint, weightless sorrow, silence that spoke louder than spectacle. And the world listened. Across decades, across more than 100 films, the work never stopped demanding him. Between takes, he carried bruises no one could see. He kept going anyway. Comment or write Rip Quentin Tarantino to honor them. Comment 70 or write Rip Bruce Willis to honor them. Music. Then life brought him a different kind of story, one without stunts, without choreography, without retakes. A story made of love and timing and the slow way distance can form without anyone noticing it happening. In the late 1980s, two rising stars met in the city of illusion. Bruce Willis, fresh from Moonlighting, still carrying the instincts of a man who learned how to read a room from behind a bar. Demi Moore, radiant, commanding, the kind of presence that could quiet a space without raising her voice. What happened between them wasn't subtle. It was immediate, like two flames finding each other. In 1987, they married, looking like the kind of couple people wanted to believe in, proof that fame didn't have to destroy tenderness. Their home filled with the sound of family. 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, Tallulah, laughter in hallways, small footsteps. The beautiful disorder of a life bigger than any premiere. After brutal schedules, Bruce would drop his scripts and become dad, letting the girls climb onto him like nothing in the world could break him. For a while, his eyes looked softer in photographs, like he'd found something steadier than applause, but Hollywood runs on speed, and speed doesn't protect love. Between long filming stretches and Demi's own rising career, distance didn't arrive like a fight, it arrived like accumulation. Days apart, weeks apart, then months-out silence became more common than laughter. And fame doesn't always destroy love with one loud moment. Sometimes it erodes it grain by grain until two people realize they're no longer standing in the same place. In 2000, after 13 years, they divorced. The world reacted like something sacred had collapsed. But behind closed doors, it wasn't scandal. It wasn't spectacle. It was two lives pulled in different directions by responsibilities that never stopped moving. Even after the marriage ended, something rare stayed: respect. They chose grace. They stayed connected. They shared holidays, protected their daughters, refused to turn history into war. Because when children exist, love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just changes shape. Comment or write Rip Demi. More to honor them. Comment or write Rip Rumor to honor them. Comment or write Rip Scout to honor them. Comment or write Rip Tallulah to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk, there are some images the world cannot hold in the same hand. The Bruce Willis who sprinted through danger with blood on his face and a grin on his mouth. And the Bruce Willis who, decades later, stood quietly in a room where the enemy had no shape, no sound, no script. For years, audiences watched him fall and rise again and again across more than 100 films. They watched him outlast explosions, outthink villains, walk away from fire like pain was just another line to deliver. But nothing, not failure, not heartbreak, not physical injury, prepared anyone for the battle that arrived without spectacle. A fight that didn't announce itself as tragedy. A fight that crept in softly, like the slow dimming of a light you didn't realize was fading until the room was already different. By the late 2010s, he had already lived what most people only dream about. A life stamped into culture. A face recognized across generations. A presence that made toughness look reachable. And still, somewhere behind the roles, something began to loosen, quietly, gradually, almost politely at first. Around 2020, he started taking smaller, lower-budget roles that left the industry confused. From the outside, people whispered about decline, about retreat. But inside his own mind, it wasn't surrender. It was resistance. It was the instinct of a man who had spent his whole life surviving, motion, who couldn't imagine himself without the rhythm of work. As long as he could keep showing up. He could keep holding the shape of who he was. Acting had once saved him from silence. He wasn't ready to release it. At first, the signs could be mistaken for exhaustion. A pause that lingered too long. A line that arrived slower than it should have. The brief search in his eyes for a word that used to land effortlessly. People who loved him didn't call it failure. They called it something else. Unbearable. Directors adjusted quietly, not to hide him, but to protect him. Dialogue was shortened. Scenes were reshaped. A voice would guide him through an earpiece so he could keep moving one step at a time through the story. To strangers, it might have looked careless. To those who knew, it was compassion in motion. And then there was Emma Hemming Willis, the person who felt the shift before the world had language for it. She saw the softening, the quieting, the way part of him sometimes seemed just slightly out of reach. Not gone, but drifting. Like fog beginning to creep across a landscape that once stood sharp and clear. By 2021, the pattern hardened. Scripts became thinner. His screen time shortened. The set around him moved differently, with careful tenderness, with unspoken love. With the kind of coordination people use when they're trying not to break what's already fragile. He still smiled. That familiar half grin still surfaced like muscle memory. But between takes, his gaze would sometimes wander toward places no one else could follow. As if he was listening to something far away, something only he could hear, and even he couldn't fully name it. Emma began to measure life in smaller units. Not in years. Not in projects, in minutes, in moments, in the rare stretches of time where he felt present, where he felt close enough to touch without reaching through distance. And then, in March of 2022, the struggle finally received a name, aphasia, a condition that breaks the bridge between thought and speech, between understanding and expression. The man whose voice had once carried across theaters, across generations, now had to wrestle with language itself. Silence didn't arrive as a dramatic ending. It arrived as an invasion, a slow theft, a quiet taking. Then in February 2023, the deeper truth followed: frontotemporal dementia. Not simply a change, but an unthreading. Something that doesn't crash all at once, but returns again and again, day after day, taking a little more. Headlines called it tragedy, but Emma called it what it really was: a fight for presence, a fight for the moments that still remained. There were no grand solutions, no miracle cure, no clean ending, only fear, and the decision to stand anyway. And she did. Emma became his anchor, his advocate, his interpreter when words broke apart, his steady hand when time began moving differently. Not in the loud, performative way the world is addicted to, but in quiet devotion that doesn't need applause. Alongside her, Demi Moore remained close, not because the past demanded it, but because love, when it's real, doesn't always disappear when its shape changes. It simply becomes something steadier, something that survives in the ordinary. Their daughters moved around him like instinct, like understanding you can't teach. Rumor Scout, Tallulah grown now, but still daughters in the deepest sense. Knowing when to speak, knowing when to pause, knowing when simply sitting beside him was the most honest. Language left. And then there were the youngest two, Mabel and Evelyn, bringing a gentler tempo into a home that had learned to carry grief quietly. They guided him through gardens, through slow afternoons, through small discoveries that would look ordinary to anyone else. Sunlight caught on leaves, a bird lifting from grass, a flower opening as if the world was offering itself back to him piece by piece. He didn't always have words, but sometimes he smiled. Sometimes that smile was faint, sometimes full. Always real. They learned a new kind of communication. Touch, music, presence. A hand held longer than usual. A shared silence that didn't feel empty. A rhythm built not on memory, but on constancy. Because love doesn't vanish when language fails. It just changes its form. There are moments, rare, devastating, precious, when the old Bruce flickers through. A laugh, a spark in the eyes. A sudden ease that feels like sunrise breaking through clouds. And then it drifts again. Not gone forever. Just slipping back behind the fog. And those moments don't last long. They don't have to. They're enough. Enough to remind them he is still inside the silence. And one image that stays with people. Bruce sits in the garden beneath soft afternoon light. His youngest leans against him, small hand pressed to his chest. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His hand rises, weathered, slightly unsteady, but guided by something deeper than memory, and rests on her back. A father's instinct still intact. Untouched by illness. Untouched by time. That is the kind of moment that breaks people open. Because it says everything words can't carry anymore. Rumor once reflected that even when he can't always say her name, she still feels him remembering love completely. That part of him never left. And maybe that's the truest thing, because for all the explosions and gunfire, for all the roles that made him immortal to audiences, this quiet courage might now define him even more. The courage to accept help, the courage to be held, the courage to meet each day without armor. A hero is not measured only by the battles he wins for an audience. Sometimes the real measure is how gently he faces the ones no one else can fight for him. And through Emma, through Demi, through his daughters, Bruce continues to give the world something greater than dialogue awareness, endurance. A kind of light for families walking the same road, perhaps. This is the final truth his life offers, that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is simply staying. Sometimes strength is being loved fiercely when your voice begins to fade. And for Bruce Willis, even now, the silence does not win. Comment 70 or write. R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Comment or write. R.I.P. Emma Hemming Willis to honor them. Comment or write Rip Demi. More to honor them. Comment or write Rip Rumor to honor them. Comment or write Rip Scout to honor them. Comment or write Rip Tallulah to honor them. Comment or write Rip Maple to honor them. Comment or write Rip Evelyn to honor them. Music around him. A family stood in a way that fame could never buy. A circle that didn't step back when the spotlight moved on. A kind of loyalty the world rarely gets to witness because it happens behind closed doors in mornings without cameras. In afternoons where the only goal is peace, Demi Moore remained part of the rhythm, not as a headline, not as a performance, but as a steady presence bound to him through history, through shared children, through the understanding that love can evolve without dying. The older daughters moved with the quiet skill that only comes from deep knowing. They didn't demand words he couldn't reach. They didn't force memories to perform. They learned to live beside him in the new language of patience, and the youngest brought softness, not ignorance of what was happening, but the pure gift of a child's presence. The way they could offer him the world again through tiny moments, a hand tugging him toward a flower, a laugh that reminded him, even for a second, what joy felt like. Emma called it their new way of being together. Not built on milestones, not built on what used to be. Built on what still existed. Built on here. Built on now, aphasia, frontotemporal dementia. Words that sound clinical but live like storms inside a family's heart. Diseases that don't strike once and leave. They return. They come back daily, quietly taking more, and still there were those flashes, those brief sparks that carried them. A squeeze of a hand, a look across a table, a smile that arrived without effort. Those moments were not small. They were everything. Then there was Diane Sawyer, visiting without cameras, without spectacle. Just sitting beside him. No performance. No interview voice. Only human presence. And in that stillness, she felt his hand reach for hers. A smile appear. A moment where he was simply there. Not the icon. Not the headline. Not the action legend. Just Bruce. And maybe that is what remains now more than anything else. Moments. Not giant futures. Not perfect days. Moments. A glance. A soft laugh. The warmth of a hand held in silence. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can give the world is not another role, but a reminder of what love looks like when life becomes harder than language, comment, or write. R.I.P. Diane Sawyer to honor them. Comment 70, you're right. R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. *** today. At age 70, Bruce Willis stands in a chapter of life that cannot be measured the way the world once insisted on measuring him. Not by opening weekend numbers. Not by box office rankings. Not by contracts signed in rooms where the air smelled like ambition, and yet those numbers still exist, sitting like evidence of a lifetime spent in motion. His estimated net worth, built through 4 relentless decades, remains around $250 million. A figure that sounds like victory when you say it quickly, but feels heavier when you sit with what it represents. Not just wealth, not just celebrity, but repetition, endurance, the grind of returning again and again to sets, to pressure, to the demand of being needed. More than 100 films. Years that didn't slow down. Physical risk absorbed as routine. Creative strain carried long after the cameras stopped rolling. A fortune isn't always proof of comfort. Sometimes it's proof of how hard a person kept running, how often they showed up, how rarely they allowed themselves to stop. For Bruce, the money didn't arrive like sudden magic. It arrived through momentum, through a life that kept asking for more, and a man who kept answering yes. Even when rest was never part of the bargain, what he built took shape in places that mirrored the different seasons of who he was. In Beverly Hills, his primary home rests behind privacy and sunlit architecture, glass walls that open to California skies, terraces made for long afternoons, pools framed by palm trees and quiet. Inside, the luxury isn't loud. It's designed to disappear into space. Wide rooms meant for gathering, meant for breathing, meant for shelter. There are private areas built for calm rather than celebration. Gardens that hold silence in a way the world never did for him. A place that once symbolized arrival and now offers safety. And then there's Idaho, a lakeside retreat that has always carried a different meaning. Not glamour, not status, but relief. The kind of place that doesn't ask you to perform. Wood and water and distance replacing sirens and deadlines and applause. In that space, wealth becomes something else entirely, not something to show, but something that creates room. Room to be quiet. Room to be human. Room to exist without demand. Over the years, he held other homes too. Places in New York and beyond. But Beverly Hills and Idaho remained like emotional poles, one tied to the industry that made him legendary, the other tied to the version of himself that could finally breathe. And once, his life was marked by machines built for speed. A Rolls-Royce with the presence of ceremony, a Porsche 911 with the precision of adrenaline, a Cadillac Escalade steady and familiar, carrying him between sets and airports and family homes. Back then, those vehicles looked like independence, like proof that he could leave and arrive whenever he wanted, like evidence of control, but time changes what symbols mean. Today, those cars are less important for where they can go than for what they carry in memory. The years when his life raced forward. Like it might never slow. Now the movement is different. The pace is gentler, guided by routine, familiarity, care. His physical presence appears quieter, slimmer, softened by time and circumstance. The expression on his face no longer carries the same sharpened urgency that once made him unforgettable on screen. It carries something else, something tender, something tired, something real. His health has reshaped more than his schedule. It has reshaped the way time itself is experienced, no longer counted in roles or milestones, but in moments that arrive softly and disappear without announcement. And the care around him is not distant. It is daily. It is constant. It is love practiced like discipline. Emma Hemming Willis manages the rhythm of his days with steady devotion, the kind that doesn't need attention, the kind that doesn't decorate itself for public approval. She holds the structure together quietly. She keeps the world from collapsing into chaos by doing what few people can. Staying present without pretending it isn't painful. Demi Moore remains close, not out of obligation, not as an act for cameras, but out of shared history and shared love for the family they built. In a world addicted to feuds, her presence is a reminder that love doesn't always become bitterness when it changes form. Sometimes it becomes a kind of protection. And their daughter's rumor. Scout Tallulah move through his life now with an instinct that cannot be rehearsed. Knowing when to speak. Knowing when to wait. Knowing when silence is not emptiness but connection. The younger daughters, Mabel and Evelyn, bring an even softer tempo. Small walks. Quiet discoveries. The gentle reintroduction of ordinary beauty. Their presence isn't denial of what's happening. It's the pure offering of a child's world, where love isn't measured by conversation, only by closeness. This condition demands patience, consistency, familiar faces, safe environments, gentle rhythms that don't strain the fragile edges of the day. Words may falter, but connection has not vanished. Touch carries meaning. Music carries memory. Shared silence carries love, and financially, his legacy appears arranged with the same sense of responsibility that shaped his career. Trust set up for his children. Futures protected from the chaos of headlines. Support given to causes that mattered, often quietly without spectacle. Without needing the world to clap. There is no grand drama in how his wealth is held. No public war over what goes where. Only stewardship. Only care extended forward, because Bruce Willis spent a career surviving explosions, escaping disasters, standing back up after impossible damage, and today, his courage looks different. It is quieter, but it is no less real. It lives in acceptance and family, in the willingness to be held when the world that once demanded him has finally moved on. The measure of his life is no longer only found in what he achieved, but in how he inhabits what remains. The man once celebrated for standing alone now stands supported, guided through gardens, anchored by hands that do not let go. He no longer chases the next role. He stays, he listens, he allows care, and in that shift, something becomes painfully clear. The cost of being admired is not fame itself. It's the life, quietly traded for it. What survives is not the noise, not the money, not the headlines. What survives is the love patient enough to remain when the lights fade. If Bruce Willis ever made you believe in resilience, if he ever reminded you that strength can change shape without disappearing, take a moment with that truth. Not to celebrate what he owned, but to honor what it took to give the world so much of himself, because admiration fades. Fame grows quiet, but the way a life is lived and the way it is held at the end, That endures. Comment 70 or write R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Comment or write R.I.P. Emma Hemming Willis to honor them. Comment or write Rip Demi. More to honor them. Comment or write Rip Rumor to honor them. Comment or write Rip Scout to honor them. Comment or write Rip Tallulah to honor them. Comment or write Rip Mabel to honor them. Comment or write Rip Evelyn to honor them. And still, even with all of this, there remains something the world cannot fully understand unless it slows down enough to feel it. Because when we talk about Bruce Willis, it's easy to talk about the legend, easy to talk about the unstoppable face on posters, easy to talk about one-liners, explosions, and the way his career reshaped a genre. But the deeper truth lives in smaller scenes. The public rarely sees Dot. It lives in mornings where no one is performing, in afternoons where time moves softly, in the way his family has learned to hold joy and grief in the same room without forcing either one to leave. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes when a person is still here, still breathing, still smiling sometimes, and yet the world you used to share begins changing its language. It isn't a sudden goodbye. It's a slow shift, and that is why Emma's strength matters. Not because it looks heroic on paper, but because it is made of daily choices. Choices no one applauds. Choices no one sees. She has spoken about learning to live inside the present, because looking too far ahead can feel like falling. She has spoken about holding on to good minutes, because that's what carries you. That is love at its most raw. Not poetic love, not cinematic love, but love as endurance, love as commitment, love as the decision to stay even when the person you love cannot always meet you with the same certainty they once did. Demi's presence matters for the same reason, because it proves something rare, that family does not always fracture when romance ends, that respect can survive. That devotion can grow into something quieter and steadier than the world expects. And the daughters, each one moving through this season with a kind of instinct that comes only from being raised inside the rhythm of his life. They know the shape of him. They know when to lean close, when to offer space, when to let the moment be what it is without trying to fix it. The youngest ones don't carry the same decades of memory, but they carry something else. The freshness of love that doesn't rely on history. They offer him simple beauty. They offer him life without the weight of explanation. This is how his story continues now. Not in theaters, not on talk shows, but in a home where love has become a language stronger than speech, and it is almost impossible to hold in your chest. The idea that the man who once made us believe we could survive anything is now surviving the kind of fight no audience can cheer away. There is no winning montage, no final explosion, no triumphant music swelling at the exact right moment. There is only presence. There is only the quiet heroism of being cared for. There is only the endurance of love when the world grows silent. And for Bruce Willis, even now, even here, that love remains louder than illness. Comment 70 or write R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There is a strange thing that happens when someone becomes a symbol. The world stops seeing the person as human first. It starts seeing them as proof of something, proof that grit works, proof that talent survives, proof that the ordinary can become immortal. Bruce Willis became that kind of symbol. The man who never flinched. The man who kept moving. The man who could take the hit, laugh through the pain, and walk out of the fire with his shoulders still squared. But the truth beneath symbols is always more fragile, always more complicated, because the strongest looking lives are often built on invisible bruises, the kind that never show up on film, the kind that don't fade when the credits roll. And if you trace Bruce Willis back far enough, you don't find luxury first. You find noise. You find hunger. You find a child in a home where security was uncertain, where arguments could rattle the air, where the future felt like something you had to wrestle into existence. He didn't become resilient because it looked good. He became resilient because he didn't have another option. That's what makes his story hit differently now. Because when you see him today, at age 70, you're not just seeing a legendary actor in a quieter chapter. You're seeing a man who has already survived more than most people ever have to survive, now facing a battle that doesn't care how famous you are, how admired you are, how hard you fought before. Aphasia, frontotemporal dementia. 2 words that sound clinical but live like storms. 2 names for something that changes the shape of time inside a family. And what makes it even harder is the way it arrived. Not as drama, not as spectacle, but as a slow unthreading. A pause that lasted too long. A line that didn't come. A moment where the words drifted just out of reach and didn't return the way they used to. For a long time, he tried to work through it, the way he had worked through everything. Because that's what endurance teaches you, to keep going, to keep moving, to keep acting like you can outlast the thing that's hurting you. But some battles don't break you with force. Some battles break you by taking away the tools you've always used to fight. And still, even as language became harder, the presence remained. The spark remained in fragments. That familiar half-smile surfaced, like a light refusing to go out entirely. There are people who vanish when the spotlight fades. And then there are people like Bruce Willis, people whose impact doesn't depend on being seen. Because what he gave the world was never only entertainment. It was a feeling. It was the feeling that courage could be messy. It was the feeling that strength could bleed. It was the feeling that even when you're afraid, you can still move. That's what audiences carried out of theaters. That's what stayed in living rooms. That's what settled into culture without needing explanation. And now, in this chapter, that courage has changed shape again. It has become quieter, more dependent, more tender, because the man who once carried stories on his own shoulders now lives inside a circle of care. A family that refuses to let him drift away alone. Emma Hemming Willis stands at the center of his days with the steady strength of someone who doesn't collapse under grief, even when grief is always nearby. Her devotion isn't performative, it's lived, in routines, in patience, in the discipline of holding a home together when the future feels uncertain. And Demi Moore remains part of that home in a way the world rarely sees. Not because she owes him something, because history doesn't vanish just because a marriage ends. Because love can become something else without turning bitter. Because the family they made still matters more than headlines ever did. Their daughters move around him with instinct, rumor, Scout, Tallulah, each one carrying the memory of the father he was, while loving the father he is now, knowing when to speak, knowing when to wait, knowing that silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes silence is where connection lives. And then Mabel and Evelyn, the youngest two, bringing softness into a space where the world could easily become heavy. They guide him through small, ordinary moments, like those moments are treasures. They show him flowers opening, sunlight shifting, birds lifting into the air. And in doing that, they offer him the world again, piece by piece, without demanding he name it, because that's what love becomes when words fall away. It becomes presence. It becomes touch. It becomes the quiet understanding of "I'm here," spoken without sound, music. For so many years, Bruce Willis lived at full speed. He belonged to a machine that never slept. A Hollywood life made of early call times, long nights, endless travel. Schedules that didn't pause for the body's needs. That machine rewarded him with everything the world calls success, money, visibility, influence. a career built on more than 100 films, a cultural footprint so deep it became permanent. But machines don't come with tenderness. They come with demand. And it's easy to forget that behind every blockbuster, behind every role that made people cheer, there was a man trading pieces of his life for the momentum of staying essential. The wealth, the estimated $250 million, reflects more than fame. It reflects an entire lifetime of saying yes when stopping wasn't allowed. It reflects risk absorbed in silence. It reflects decades of giving the world strength while quietly carrying exhaustion. There is no way to separate the fortune from the cost, because what did that pace take? It took time. It took stillness. It took moments that could never be purchased back, even when he was surrounded by people. There were long stretches of his life where the job owned him, where rest was something he had to schedule like an appointment, where family moments arrived in fragments between sets, between flights, between obligations that didn't care if his heart needed more. And yet, even with all of that, the world never stopped asking him for more. More roles, more appearances, more proof that he could keep delivering the version of himself people loved. That's what fame does. It turns a human being into a product. Not cruelly, always, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with love, but still it asks for repetition. And Bruce Willis gave it. He gave it until his life reached this moment where giving isn't possible the way it used to be, where the world must finally accept that the man who once lived as an unstoppable force is now living inside fragility. But fragility is not failure. Fragility is a human truth, and if his story offers anything to the world now, it is this: that strength does not disappear just because it becomes quiet. Strength can become acceptance. Strength can become allowing someone to help you. Strength can become staying present even when words don't come. That is the courage he carries. Now, the courage to remain. Music. There is something haunting about the way the world processes decline. People want an ending they can understand. People want a clean story, a triumphant rise, a tragic fall, a neat conclusion that fits inside a headline, but real life rarely moves in straight lines. Real life drifts, real life changes. Language. Real life asks you to love someone, even when you can't hold on to the version of them you remember most. Clearly, that's what makes this chapter so painful and so sacred. Because Bruce Willis is still here, still surrounded, still held, still loved, and the love around him is not imaginary. It is lived in choices that happen quietly every day. Choices that don't need to be broadcast to matter. Emma is living inside a reality that many families live inside. The reality of watching someone you love change in ways you can't stop. The reality of learning that there is no map. The reality of holding on to good minutes because those minutes become everything. Demi understands a version of loss that doesn't require bitterness. A version of loyalty that survives the ending of romance. A version of devotion that says, we're family even now. Especially now, their daughters understand what it means to love across shifting ground. To show up, to protect him from the noise of the world. To choose tenderness over grief. And in that circle, Bruce Willis, the man who once seemed untouchable, is allowed to be human. He is allowed to be cared for. He is allowed to rest. For decades, he gave the world the image of the lone hero, the man who stands alone against chaos and survives anyway. But the quiet truth of his life now is something even more powerful. No one was ever meant to stand alone forever, and maybe that's what his story gives us now. A reminder that the greatest strength in the end is not how hard you can fight by yourself, but how deeply you can be loved when you can't fight the same way anymore. He once taught audiences how to keep moving. Now he teaches them how to be held. And even in the silence, Even in the fading of language, even in the slow drift of time, he remains Dot not as a character, not as a performance, but as a life, a real man. And for those who have ever watched him on screen and felt something inside themselves rise, that is what we honor now. Not the explosions, not the fame, not the money. We honor the cost. We honor the endurance. We honor the love that stayed when the lights moved on. Comment 70 or write R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Comment or write R.I.P. Emma Hemming Willis to honor them. Comment or write Rip Demi. More to honor them. Comment or write Rip Rumor to honor them. Comment or write Rip Scout to honor them. Comment or write Rip Tallulah to honor them. Comment or write Rip Mabel to honor them. Comment or write Rip Evelyn to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk, there are lives that fade quietly. And then there are lives that remain, even when the voice grows softer, even when the spotlight moves on, even when the world stops asking for new performances. Bruce Willis is the second kind, because what he built was never only a career. It was a feeling stitched into generations, a kind of bravery that didn't feel unreachable, a kind of toughness that didn't require perfection, a kind of hero who looked like someone you might actually know, someone who could be scared, hurt, exhausted, and still find a way forward. That is what made him different. That is what made him last. And now, at age 70, it is impossible to speak his name without feeling the weight of time, without feeling the tenderness of what remains, without sensing the quiet truth beneath the legend. The greatest stories are not only about what a person achieves, they are about what a person endures for decades. The world watched Bruce Willis stand in the center of chaos and survive, but the survival that shaped him first happened far away from cameras. It happened in childhood, in hunger, in cold rooms, in the shadow of arguments, in silence. He learned early that stability was not guaranteed, that love could exist alongside fracture, that a home could be filled with warmth and damage in the same breath. And when his father David left, it wasn't just a man walking away, it was a boy learning what abandonment felt like without the luxury of collapsing. He had siblings, he had responsibility, he had a life that required him to keep moving even when grief sat heavy in his chest. His mother, Marlene, tried to hold the family together with whatever strength she could find. Not the loud kind of strength that makes speeches, the quiet kind that keeps a kitchen running even when there isn't much in the pot. The quiet kind that keeps going even when the world offers no mercy. And in that world, Bruce carried his own hidden war, a stutter that made speaking feel like pain, a silence that wasn't peace but imprisonment. He learned humiliation early. He learned how laughter can wound. He learned how a child can become invisible in a room full of people. But then the stage gave him something he had never been offered before, released in the harsh light of performance. His stutter disappeared. His voice arrived. The boy who could barely say his own name became someone who could fill a room with presence. And once that door opened, he never fully walked away from it, because acting wasn't just art for him, it was survival. It was the place where he could take pain and turn it into movement, where he could take fear and turn it into rhythm, where he could take silence and turn it into power. That is why his career always carried urgency, not just ambition, urgency, as if stopping meant falling back into the shadows he once lived in, music. And when he left New Jersey, when he went to Manhattan with almost nothing, he wasn't chasing luxury. He was chasing a chance to exist as more than what his childhood predicted. Those early years in the city weren't glamorous. They were cold. They were relentless. They were made of rejection, stacked so high it could have crushed him. He worked wherever he could. He slept where he could. He survived on scraps of hope and small meals stretched too far. He walked through nights where the future felt like a locked door. And still he auditioned. Still he showed up. Still he kept his head up even when no one looked at him long enough to remember his name. That persistence became the foundation of everything. The kind of persistence that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from necessity. Then, when the break finally arrived, when Moonlighting happened, it wasn't just a career moment. It was proof that survival can become destiny. David Addison became the doorway through which the world finally saw him. The rebel charm, the speed, the humor sharpened by exhaustion, the fire held behind a grin. He became beloved almost overnight. Awards followed. Praise arrived. But inside him, there was still the same restless pressure. Don't waste this. Don't lose this. Don't let the door close again. Then came Die Hard, the role that demanded proof. The role the world doubted he could carry. And instead of trying to convince anyone with words, he did it the way he'd always done it, with work, with endurance, with physical truth that cameras couldn't fake. John McClane didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a man pushed too far who refused to quit. And that's why people believed in him. That's why the character became legend. And that's why Bruce Willis became something larger than a star. He became a cultural imprint. But even then, life didn't stop testing him. Careers rise, careers wobble, careers get judged with cruelty. Films succeed, films fail, headlines shift, and he kept moving anyway, because once you've survived hunger and silence, you don't collapse easily under criticism. He proved himself again with Pulp Fiction. He reshaped the room again with The Sixth Sense. He reminded the world that he could carry both noise and stillness, action and restraint, fire and quiet. Over 100 films, decades, a life lived at full pace, and that pace built wealth, the estimated $250 million. But it also built exhaustion, because the truth is simple. No matter how much money you make, you cannot buy time back. Music and then love arrived. Not as a fairy tale, as something real, something complicated, something bright enough to make the world believe in it. Bruce Willis and Demi Moore became a symbol. The world held up like proof that fame could still contain devotion. They married in 1987, a couple that looked like cinema even in still photographs. And soon there were children, 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, Tallulah, a family built in a world that doesn't stop moving. A home filled with laughter and chaos and life. For a time, Bruce found something in fatherhood that no role could give him. A kind of groundedness, a kind of honesty, a kind of joy that didn't require applause. But Hollywood doesn't respect stillness. It demands motion. And over time, distance grew the way distance often grows, slowly, quietly, until it becomes undeniable. The divorce in 2000 did not become a war. It became something rarer. Grace. They stayed close. They protected their daughters. They shared holidays. They proved that family can survive even when romance changes form. And in the years that followed, Bruce built a new life with Emma Hemming Willis. A love that became his steady ground through the hardest season of all. Because when illness arrived, first unnamed, then diagnosed, it didn't strike just him. It struck everyone who loved him. Aphasia, frontotemporal dementia, conditions that don't simply change a person, but change an entire family's relationship with time. Emma became his constant. Not as a caretaker alone, but as an advocate, a protector, a witness to his life in the quiet hours. Demi remained close. Not out of obligation, but because history doesn't vanish when love changes its dress. Their daughters stood beside him with instinct, and their youngest children, Mabel and Evelyn, brought softness into the days, guiding him through gardens, through sunlight, through small moments that still mattered. That is what remains now. Not the noise of fame, but the steady language of love when words are harder to reach. There are moments where Bruce's spark returns for a second, a smile, a laugh, a squeeze of the hand, and those moments become everything, because the world tends to worship strength only when it looks loud. But the strength that endures is often quiet, the strength of accepting help, the strength of being present. The strength of staying, even inside silence. That is the courage Bruce Willis carries now, and it is as real as anything he ever gave the world on screen. Music. This is what makes his story timeless. It does not end in spectacle. It ends in truth. A man who fought his way from hardship into legend. A man who carried scars invisibly and turned them into craft. A man who built an empire and still understood that the only thing that truly matters cannot be bought, because in the end, it is not the money that stays. It is not the car collection. It is not the properties. It is not the box office records. What stays is what he made people feel. He made people feel that courage could be imperfect. He made people feel that survival could look like humor. He made people feel that even an ordinary man can hold back the dark long enough to protect someone else. And now, even as his voice has grown quieter, that gift remains. It remains in the way audiences still speak his name with warmth. It remains in the way families facing the same illnesses look to his story and feel less alone. It remains in the way love has formed a fortress around him, proving that what's real does not disappear when the spotlight leaves. Bruce Willis once made a career out of staying upright when everything was trying to knock him down. And today, he is still upright, not because he's fighting alone, but because he is held. Held by Emma. Held by Demi. Held by Rumor Scout. Tallulah. Held by Mabel and Evelyn. Held by a family that chose presence over distance. That is the final image worth carrying, not an explosion behind him, not a weapon in his hand, not a smirk delivered for a crowd, but a man in a garden, sunlight on his face, and the quiet certainty of love refusing to let go. And for Bruce Willis, even now, the silence does not win. Comment 70 or write R.I.P. Bruce Willis to honor them. Comment or write Rip David to honor them. Comment or write Rip Marlene to honor them. Comment or write Rip Demi Moore to honor them. Comment or write R.A.P. Emma Hemming Willis to honor them. Comment or write R.I.P. Rumor to honor them. Comment or write Rip Scout to honor them. Comment or write Rip Tallulah to honor them. Comment or write Rip Mabel to honor them. Comment or write Rip Evelyn to honor them. Comment or write Rip Quentin Tarantino to honor them. Comment or write Rip Diane Sawyer to honor them. ***. Some stories don't end the way the world expects them. 2. They don't close with fireworks. They don't seal themselves into a perfect final scene. They don't offer the clean comfort of certainty. Sometimes the ending is quieter than the beginning. Sometimes the ending is not an ending at all, but a slow, soft settling into what remains. And that is where Bruce Willis stands now, at age 70, in the most human chapter of a life that once looked indestructible from the outside, because the world met him as a legend. A man who could stand in the middle of disaster and still find a way out. A man who made danger look survivable. A man who turned pain into something audiences could cheer for, but long before he became a symbol of toughness, he was just a boy trying to survive the weight of a home that didn't always feel safe. A boy raised around arguments and strain. Boy learning early that stability was fragile. A boy whose silence wasn't chosen. It was forced by a stutter so severe that every word felt like risk. And inside that pressure, something vital formed. Endurance. Not the glamorous kind. Not the kind you brag about, The kind you develop because you have to. The kind you learn when you're too young to carry so much. But you carry it anyway because no one else will doubt his father David carried his own storm. A presence shaped by battles he never named aloud. A tension that lived behind the eyes. A heaviness that sometimes spilled into the home and pressed down on everyone inside it. His mother, Marlene, tried to make warmth out of scarcity. Tried to stitch together comfort from whatever she could reach. Tried to keep her children standing when life kept leaning hard against them. Those early years didn't create a perfect man. They created a fighter who learned how to stand still while the world shook. A fighter who learned how to swallow humiliation and turn it into fuel. Fighter who learned that laughter could be used like armor. Then, the stage gave him a miracle. Under lights, his stutter disappeared. Under performance, his voice arrived. And that voice didn't just change his future. It saved him from being trapped inside himself forever. That is what acting became for Bruce Willis. Not fantasy, not escape, salvation, music. He took that salvation with him into New York, into hunger, into cold apartments, into the long grind of being ignored. The city didn't welcome him. It didn't reject him. It simply didn't notice him. He lived close to disappearing.